Hi guys! Today we're gonna make bucket bags. I designed and developed the sewing pattern in 3 different sizes. It's versatile and it has a very practical interior. The sewing pattern is, as always, available in my Etsy shop. Link is down below. And if you came from Etsy, thank you so much for purchasing the pattern. We'll jump right into this. We'll make the bucket bags from different materials. I will also use different embellishment just to give you a few ideas for the design so that you can create your original piece that you will love. And now let's jump right into this. First, let's go over the sewing pattern. Each page of the sewing pattern has these grid numbers on the bottom. They stand for the number of the row and the number of each page in the row. Once you laid out all pages according to the grid numbers, it should look something like this. And here is the overview with the corresponding numbers for the standard-sized bucket bag pattern. If you need help with putting together a sewing pattern, link to a tutorial is in the video description and also here in the right corner. Now here we have again all sewing pattern pieces. These are the pattern pieces for the sectioned version exterior, where you can use different materials for the top and bottom strips and for the center section. I use these pattern pieces for this bag and also for this bag. Here we have the pattern pieces for the bag bottom and for the outside pocket. The pocket size increases with the size of the bag. I personally also use this pocket pattern piece on the lining. This is the lining pattern piece. It gives you an option to make it sectioned on the top by aligning the lining pattern piece with the top strip pattern piece. Simply fold the lining piece along the long lines for the bottom part and combine it with the top strip. It will give you exactly the correct full size once you have sewn the parts together. And here's what it can look like. Optionally, you can use the full lining pattern piece for the exterior of the bag, like I did for the Steampunk version and for the simple but timeless version with the boxing gym logo. And these are the pattern pieces for the side straps, where the D-rings for the back strap are placed, and a few different sized inside pockets. Adjust the width of the side strap to the width of your D-ring, and increase or decrease the size of the inside pockets as necessary for your personal needs. First, we're gonna make this sectioned design in the size standard. For the middle section of the exterior, I used burlap underlaid with faux velour to make it sturdier. Also, burlap is a bit of see-through, so this is very useful. First, I pinned one side of the middle sections together and I went in with straight stitch. Then I folded the seam to the sides and I have sewn through with straight stitch to make the seams flat and stay in place. And then it looked like this. Next, I grabbed the top strip made of velvet and I started pinning it to the top of the middle section. By the way, I made the strip of one piece by placing the sewing pattern piece for the top strip on folded fabric, disregarding the seam allowance where the fold was. When the strip has been sewn in, I folded the seam upwards and I have sewn through with straight stitch. Next, I started working on the pockets. Each pocket has lining with iron-on interfacing. I always pin the edges of each pocket together, wrong sides out, and I mark a section that will remain open so that I can turn the pockets to the right side later. And then I sew the edges with straight stitch. I cut back the extra fabric a little bit, and I also cut the edges at an angle close to the seam so that they will be as well shaped as possible. And then I turn the pockets to the right side. Next, I pin the edges, especially the section where the opening was. And I personally like sewing through the top edge with straight stitch. I like pinning the smallest pocket to one of the larger ones and sewing it on. To create sections in the smallest pocket for tissues, I always mark where I want to have the additional seam. Here is what the pocket can look like when it's been sewn on. A tip: when you are placing the pocket pattern pieces on your fabric, use a guide and sewing crayon or any other kind of marker that you like working with to mark the outlines of the pockets. You will have a perfect shape. Also, you can fold the sewing pattern piece for the pocket with the rounded edge in half and place it on folded fabric to make sure that the rounded edge will be perfectly symmetrical. I personally also like drawing lines for the seams on the side with the interfacing, and I use them as guide when I'm sewing, which helps me to achieve the perfect shape of my pockets. For the bag we're making right now, I made the outside pocket of burlap with full velour layer under the burlap, like for the rest of the exterior, and I lined it with a layer of lining with iron-on interfacing, and I also added my signature crest. Other than that, I worked the pocket just like the other ones you have just seen. Next, I started working on the side straps. I took 2 strips of velvet, twice as wide as the inner width of the D-rings. The length of the straps was according to the sewing pattern. I only adjusted the width to the width of the D-rings I was using. I folded the fabric with the right side out and I pinned the edges. Then I have sewn the edges with flat lock stitch on my serger. For that, I removed the right needle. I used only the left needle. I lowered the needle tension. I kept the regular tension for my upper looper, and I increased the tension of the bottom looper. And then I have sewn through the edges. A tip: try the ideal settings for flat lock on your serger on a spare piece of fabric before you move on to the actual parts. Next, I pulled the stitches apart to make them flat. I also like tucking in the top edge and sewing through with straight stitch for a nicer finish below the D-ring. I pinned the outside pockets to the front part, and I did some measuring to ensure that the pocket would be centered. When I was measuring, I had to keep in mind that now I had a seam on the left side and there was still seam allowance on the right side, so I had to deduct the seam allowance when I was comparing the measurements. The best thing you can do is always to mark the center first before you start sewing the pieces together, and that will help you out. Once I was sure that the pocket was centered, I have sewn it on with straight stitch. And then I took one of the straps and I put it on the side seam. The top edge went all the way up to the top edge of the bag exterior, which is where later the D-ring would come in. I have sewn the strap on with straight stitch and I went up to the place where the burlap met the top velvet strip. The loose end of the top of the side strap would be then later for the D-ring, which I planned on putting on later. I pinned the edge of the front parts together, and then I have sewn it together with straight stitch. I unfolded the seam to the sides and I pinned it in place. And then I have sewn through with straight stitch to keep everything nicely flat, and then it looked like this. I placed the second D-ring strap on the new seam. I measured a bit back and forth again to make sure I had the correct placement before I have sewn it on, just like I have sewn on the other side strap. And here is what the bag looked like so far. As a next step, I have sewn together the ends of the bottom velvet strip, and I pinned the strip to the bottom edge of the bag. I kept the ends of the D-ring strips long all the way down because I find that they add to the stability of the bottom strip. It's not necessary, but I find it nice to have. You can cut the ends off if that's what you prefer. Once the bottom strip was sewn in place, I folded the seam down and I pinned it in place. I have sewn through with straight stitch. And here's what the bag exterior looked like when I was finished. I took the pattern piece for the lining and I placed it on a folded piece of Decovil, which is a thick iron-on interfacing. I cut out a full piece that would cover the entire bag exterior. You can work with the light version of Decovil or with the thicker one. I have great experience with both. For this bag, I use the thicker version. I just can't show you the packaging because I don't have it anymore. I ironed the Decovil step by step on the wrong side of the bag exterior. And this looks very complicated, but I have a reason for this. I did that because I wanted to have the side straps sewn inside of the bottom strip, as you have seen. I also find that when I use the Decovil in a full piece on a section bag, that I have a better result and it's more stable than when I iron it on the pieces separately. Plus, I avoid also bulky seams. Alternatively, you could finish the front and back parts of the bag exterior separately and iron on the Decovil first in 2 separate pieces, and then you could sew the sides together and place the side straps all the way down, and they would be over the bottom strip. We will do something like that for the denim version later. A tip: turn the bag exterior to the right side and iron over the Decovil again to make sure it is properly attached before you move on to the next steps. When I was done ironing on the Decovil, I took the bag bottom part and pinned it in place. I made the bag bottom part of velvet and I ironed on the thicker version of Decovil. As always, when pinning in round edges, it sometimes takes a bit of repinning until the pieces are correctly aligned, so take your time. I also find that pinning from the top, basically from the point of view of the bag exterior, or let's call it the bag walls, is easier. I fold the bag walls over the bottom, and that is when I personally get the best results. And this is what it looked like when the bag bottom part was pinned in place. A tip: sew in the bag bottom from the top, also from the point of view of the bag walls. Hold the bag with your left hand up and sew slowly through the edge with straight stitch. Use the right edge of the sewing foot as your guide. Take your time, you have thick layers there. Slower pace also allows you to keep the same distance of the stitches from the edge. When the back bottom part was sewn in place, I cut back the excess fabric around the edge a little bit and I turned the back to the right side. I shaped the edges as well as I could. I usually kind of roll the fabric back and forth until I'm happy with the result. Next, I marked the centers on the sides of the back bottom. I connected the marks with a sewing crayon line. Then I marked the center of the line and drew a perpendicular line which created a cross. I measured 3/4 of an inch from the edge on each side of the lines. These, plus the center of the cross, were my marks for the back feet. I grabbed a plastic folder that was a bit of a see-through and I placed it over the back bottom. I copied the shape of the back bottom a bit further from the edges so the piece would end up being smaller and it would fit inside the bag later. I copied the marks for the back feet. I made holes into the bag bottom and the plastic folder piece with my small pointy scissors. I put into each hole on the bag bottom a bag foot. I put the plastic folder piece inside the bag and I went with the bag feet through the plastic folder piece as well. Then I closed the back feet with the back feet discs. Alternatively, put the plastic folder over the sewing pattern piece for the bag bottom. Copy it without seam allowance and go even a bit further in. Cut off a bit of the edge if necessary so that the piece would fit inside the bag. Make the bag feet holes into the bag bottom and put in the bag feet. Now place the plastic folder piece on the bag bottom and copy the position of the bag feet. Make holes into the plastic folder piece. Place it inside the bag, pull the pins of the bag feet through and close them with the back feet discs. Then I pulled the D-rings over the loose ends of the side straps. I made sure the position on each side was equal. I punched into each side 2 holes for studs through the straps and through the back top strip. I put in studs and hammered them on with the tools that came with my studs. Then the D-rings were in place and they looked like this. Let's work on the lining. I like making the lining with a top strip of the same material that is on the outside top strip. We'll have multiple pockets and a strap with a snap hook for a keychain. Use the lining sewing part folded along the long lines on the top. Make it either of 2 pieces or place the pattern piece on folded fabric to make the lining of 1 piece. In that case, deduct the seam allowance on the fold. Here is an example of the lining made of faux velour, which is made of 2 pieces. I have sewn the two pieces together and I folded the seam to the sides, and I went through with straight stitch again to make the seam stay flat and in place. Then I added a top strip made of one whole piece of velvet, like I did for the bag exterior. I pinned the velvet strip in place and I added a strip of the faux velour fabric with a snap hook on it, and I placed it on one side about 2.5 inches from the edge between the faux velour part of the lining and the velvet strip. For the keychain strap, you can use the side strap sewing pattern, just make it a little bit shorter and adjust the width again to the width of the snap hook that you're gonna be using for the keychain strap. Sew along the long edge and one side and then turn it to the right side, or sew along only the long edge and then tuck in the edge on one end and sew through with straight stitch. Pull the nicer end through a snap hook and close it with 2 studs like I did here when I was creating a back strap. Now back to the lining. When the velvet strip was sewn on, I folded the seam to the sides and I have sewn through with straight stitch. Alternatively, you can just fold it upwards and sew through there. I ironed on a full piece of iron-on interfacing. For the iron-on interfacing, I placed the pattern piece for full lining on folded piece of iron-on interfacing to make it of one whole piece. Here's another example of the sectioned lining. Here the tartan part is made of one piece. I also already added the strip with a snap hook for a keychain, and then I tried out a few layouts for the pockets. Once I was happy with the placement, I have pinned them in place. I've sewn 2 pockets on the lining with straight stitch. And for the largest pocket, I have sewn only the inside edge first. Then I made 2 marks from the top for 2 snaps to divide the pocket into 2 compartments. I punched holes into the pocket and the lining. I placed a piece of the thicker decoville on the back of the lining to make it stronger for the snaps. Then I put in 2 snaps. Once that was done, I could close them to divide the pocket in 2 compartments if I wanted to. I pinned the remaining edges of the pocket to the lining and I have sewn them on with straight stitch. And here is what the lining looked like when it was finished. The next step is always to pin the sides of the lining together and leaving an opening so the back can be turned out later. And this is the same regardless of what material you're using, how many inside pockets you'll have, and whatever size of the back you'll be making. Just consider the size of the back bottom for the opening. I usually sew the side as far as the top strip goes and then about 1 inch or 1.5 inches on the bottom. Once the sides minus the opening are sewn together, I start pinning in the lining bottom. I always iron on the lining bottom the same decoville I use for the back bottom. It helps to make the back bottom very sturdy. And when it's done, I like cutting back the excess fabric a little bit before I go on with the next steps. Time to put the back exterior and the lining together. I turned the lining to the wrong side. I placed the back exterior, which was right side out, inside of the back lining like so. I prefer to clip the top edge, but you could use pins too. I always make sure the lining has big enough opening on the side before I sew the pieces together. Then I have sewn the top edge with straight stitch. Next, I cut back the excess fabric a little bit closer to the seam. I carefully pulled out the back bottom through the opening first, and then I started turning the back to the right side. Here I always pin or clip together the opening. I closed it with straight stitch on my sewing machine close to the edge. Alternatively, you can close it with leather hand stitch. Then I put the lining inside of the bag like so. And I shaped the top edge. I clipped it in place before I have sewn around the edge with straight stitch. And here is what the bag looked like so far. With the help of the markings on the sewing pattern piece for the top strip, I made marks for the grommets. I made sure the marks were at the same distance from the top edge. I always measure multiple times back and forth to ensure perfect placement. I use these grommets that come with tools. I punched holes into the top strip where the marks were, but for that I used one of my leather crafting tools. But the tool that came with the grommets would have done the job too. I just prefer my leather crafting tool. Then I started placing the grommets in the top strip and I closed them with the tool from the packaging. Here is what the bag looked like when all grommets were in. I took a burlap cord and I pulled it through the grommets. I started in the center on the front part, so I would have the end in the middle on the front. And then I made knots at each end of the burlap cord. I created a drawstring closure for the cord. It's a piece of velvet that closes very tightly around the cord. And here's how I did it. I took a 6 inches times 3 inches piece of velvet and I made a strap the same way I made the side straps. I tucked in one end to create a nicer finish. I folded the strap over the cord like so. I punched in 2 holes and closed it with 2 studs. The key here is that the strap needs to close really tightly around the cord so that when you push it up to close the bag, it would stay in place. Now we'll make the bag strap. For this burlap bag, I made the bag strap of a layer of velvet on the top and a cotton strap with a pattern on the inside. The strap has a belt slider and snap hooks. Here's another version I made for another burlap bag. Here is how to make a strap like that. I took 12 inches long cotton strap with pattern of my choice and 16 inches long strip of velvet that was twice as wide as the cotton strap. I pinned the long side of the velvet strip. I have sewn it on my serger with flat lock, like I did for the side straps. Then I made sure that the seam was centered, and I pulled on the sides to pull the seam apart a little bit so that it would be flat. Then I tucked in the ends and I have sewn through with straight stitch. Then the ends of the velvet strip looked like this. I secured the cotton strap to the velvet strap, making sure there was the same distance from the edge of the end of the velvet strip on each side. I have sewn the strips together with straight stitch on both long edges. I put a snap hook on one side and I folded the velvet end over it like so. I punched in 2 holes, then I put 2 studs in the holes and I closed the studs with pliers. I placed the belt slider on the other end of the strap. I added the snap hook again, and then I went back through the belt slider center. There I folded the velvet piece over the center pin of the belt slider to the cotton strap, like I did on the other side with the snap hook. I closed it with 2 snaps. If you need a more detailed tutorial for how to make back straps, I got you covered. I have a tutorial for that, which is linked in the video description. Now that I was done with the back strap, all I had to do was to attach it with the snap hooks to the D-rings on the sides of the bucket bag, and then the bucket bag was all finished. Now I'll show you how I made the steampunk design. It's standard size, made of velvet with the tartan lining. It has a metal closure in the shape of a B in the center, and the back strap is made of velvet with black nylon strap on the inside. The base for the exterior is a full piece of velvet. For that, I used the sewing pattern for full lining and placed it on folded velvet to get one single piece. I ironed on the back the thicker decoville. I folded the piece in the middle, and with the help of the sewing pattern piece for full lining, I made my marks for the front pocket. I pinned the front pocket in place and I have sewn it in with straight stitch. Next, I started laying out steampunk decor. I also put a piece of chain on the top edge of the pocket. First, I glued all pieces in place with shoe super glue. Then I started stitching all to the velvet on a few spots of each piece to keep it in place even better. Some wheels had big enough holes for a stud, which speeded things a bit. I didn't want to rely only on the super glue. I want to be able to wash the bag if necessary in future, and the glue could dissolve and the decor would fall off. So stitching made definitely sense to me. I painted the yarn with Angelus metallic acrylic paints to make it match the metal decor. As a next step, I marked the center on the side. I pinned in one of the side straps. I have sewn it on and left a piece loose on the top for the D-ring. Then I put in the D-ring and closed it with 2 studs. I made marks on the side strap for 2 rows of studs. I punched in holes and then I put the studs in. And then the side strap looked like this. I pinned together the other edge of the back exterior and I have sewn it together. Then I folded the seam to the sides and I went through with straight stitch to keep it flat. Then I pinned the second side strap over the seam and I've sewn it in place with straight stitch. I put in the D-ring and again 2 rows of studs. Then I turned it to the wrong side and I put on the back bottom. I made it of velvet with a thicker decoville. And I also added the plastic folder piece and back feet, just like we did for the burlap bag. Here is the lining. You have already seen how to make lining and how to finish that, so we will skip the steps. I marked the center on the top of the lining about 1.5 inches from the top. I made 2 cuts for the back part of my closure. I also cut a small rectangle of the plastic folder which would fortify the back of the lining where the closure would be. I pulled the pins of the closure through the plastic piece and I closed it with a metal plate that comes with the closure. And here's what it looked like. As a next step, I have sewn both the lining and the back exterior together the same way I did for the burlap bag, so we'll skip the steps. I shaped the edge and secured it with clips, and then I have sewn close to the edge with straight stitch, while my husky was, as usual, very helpful. And then I marked the center on the front for the front piece of the closure. I cut in a hole in the shape of the closure piece. I put it on with the back of the piece and I screwed it in place. Then my closure looked like this. And after I finished making the back strap, my steampunk bucket bag was finished. This is a similar design where the exterior is made of one piece, but this time it's size medium. The cord is thinner and it closes with a drawstring stopper, and there's also magnet closure in the center. The entire bag hardware is gunmetal color, and so is the chain strap that I'm using instead of regular bag strap. The lining is made of tartan with velvet top strip. This time I placed the front pocket on the center of the piece for the back exterior. I find that it made the placing and sewing on of the straps definitely easier. Now the seam is on the back, but on velvet it's barely visible. The lining for this bag is the same concept I have already shown you, so we don't have to go over the steps. Only I used the thinner Decoville for the lining instead of regular interfacing, and it gave the lining more shape. I actually ended up liking it so much that I'll be doing this for all my future bags from now on. The bag bottom has again an additional piece I made of plastic folder, and here are some more details before I put the exterior and the lining together. The height of the bag is the same like the height of the size large. The bag bottom is exactly between the two sizes. Since the top is now larger and wider, I added the magnet closure in the center. It gives you the option to close the bag just with the magnet and have the cord rudder for decoration purposes. The last design I'll show you today is this denim sectioned version in the size large. I made the backstrap of the checked denim on the outside and blue denim on the inside. And the cord that goes through the grommets is light blue to match the whole style. The bag exterior is made of one sectioned piece. I positioned the front pocket to the very center so I would have again easier time sewing on the straps. And at the end the seam was again in the back. As interfacing I have used again the thicker Decoville. I used denim fabric with print for the lining paired with blue denim strip on the top to match the exterior. Here we have the front pocket, then a double pocket with compartments, which is basically two pockets sewn together. You have seen that when I made the burlap bag, how to do that. I made this pocket with a seam in the middle and use one of the sections for my sunglasses, and the last pocket is the largest. The lining has also, in addition to all the pockets, again a keychain strap with a snap hook. I made the lining as always, and I kept a part of the side seam open. I ironed on the lining the Decoville light, and I added on the bottom patchwork fleece to make it padded. I put the lining and the bag exterior together the same way I did with all the other designs. A tip: add second layer of the thicker Decoville on the bag bottom to make it extra sturdy. I did that for this size, and in addition to that I added again a piece of plastic folder when I was punching in the bag feet. And the additional layer of Decoville on the bag bottom definitely made the bottom much sturdier, and the bag keeps wonderfully shaped no matter how much stuff I put in. While I was turning the bag to the right side through the lining opening, the lining ripped a bit at the bottom, but I have simply sewn it back together before I close the opening with straight stitch. Once I put the lining inside, I shaped the top edge and I put clips in before I have sewn through the edge with straight stitch. By the way, if you want to have a magnet closure in the center, I highly recommend putting it in before you sew all together. And you guessed it, I learned the hard way. After I installed all grommets, I pulled the cord through the grommets and I used these cord end pieces for a nicer finish. I pulled the center of the cord out and made a knot in it, and then I pulled over the outer layer of the cord with the end piece, and then it looked like this. For the cord, I made the drawstring closure with a piece of denim. It was 5 times 3 inches and it had a piece of Decoville on the inside. I have sewn the long edge with flat lock, then I tucked in the edges and I've sewn through with straight stitch. And then I folded the piece over the cord and I closed it with 2 studs. For the back strap, I took 2 8 cm wide strips, one of checked denim and one of plain blue denim. I ironed the sides of each strip towards the center. I added a 3.8 cm wide strip of Decoville on the inside of the blue denim strip. I tucked in the ends of both denim strips. I compared the lengths of both strips and I cut back the denim strip on each end by about 1.5 inches so that the checked strip would overlap. And then I tucked the ends in again. I put both sides together and secured them with clips. I put a snap hook on one end and folded the checked part over so it met with the edge of the blue denim strip. Then I have sewn through with straight stitch on each side up to the edge of the denim strip, the blue denim strip on the other side. I installed back strap slider on the other side before I put in the second snap hook. I made a small strip of the blue denim that created a cuff over the side of the strap with the belt slider. I closed it with 2 studs. Here's what it looked like. And then the bag was finished. I am using this bag as my gym bag and I absolutely love it because a lot fits in. And last but not least, let's compare the different sizes. So here we have the sewing pattern pieces for the bag bottoms. And these are the sewing pattern pieces for the full lining or for the full exterior size. The pockets vary in sizes too, but you can always combine any pockets from any size for any version you're gonna make. The principle of making these bags is always the same as you have seen. And now you can design your own bucket bag and have fun sewing it. Alrighty, so we are finished. You can let me know in the comments which of the designs that we made together today was your favorite. And you can also let me know how would your favorite bucket bag look. What materials would you use? What colors would you embellish your bag? And if, then how? It's always super interesting to hear that from you guys. Now, while I'm using this one the most because it has just a super practical small size and it's kind of very easy to combine with anything you wear, My personal favorite is definitely the steampunk version. It's been a lot of work, but it's been also a lot of fun making this one, and I absolutely love the bee closure because it's just so super cute and it's just so original. And I'm also wearing this one a lot because I'm using the monster size, as I like calling it, as my gym bag, and I fit in anything I need. And since I used the super thick Decoville, it's so sturdy. And I have to say, when I was working for the first time with the thick Decoville, I was really afraid of that material. But I was very surprised how easily the needle of my sewing machine comes through, despite thick layer of denim and then the Decoville. So I'm super happy I gave it a try, because the thicker Decoville makes any bag just super sturdy, and it keeps the shape so nicely, which also makes it look more professional. So I highly recommend it. But that's gonna be it for today. If you have any questions regarding the sewing pattern or the process, if there was anything missing for you in the tutorial, please let me know either here in the comments, or you can send me a message on Etsy and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I'm always happy to help. Thank you all so much for watching. I wish you a wonderful day and I'm looking forward to seeing you with my next sewing project. Bye.